Thank you very much. It's always nice to be present for one's eulogy. That's it. I'm up now. All right. Well, that was very complimentary. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for coming. And I'll give a little note because I was mentioning this to Carolyn. When I use the word "you," it is like you, Paul, or you, AJ, or you, Abby. So the "you" is directed to the young in the audience, or the young at heart. So if you're feeling like, wait, I still count as young, feel free to include yourself in that "you." So I start off with this notion about, like, it seems appropriate here as we begin to say, like, well, okay, why are we here? I'm not going to ask you, Christina, to answer that question because there might be a salty response to that, but we'll take this in the notion of, like, why are you here? Well, you, Christina, are here, and you, Paul, are here, and you, Olivia, are here because you're getting ready to graduate from high school. And that's a really exciting time. You're getting ready for this next big step, this idea of college. You are hopefully reflecting some on the last 12 years or 18 years, kind of more like in terms of education or more in terms of your life. You're reflecting on what you've done in those times, and at least some of you are wondering whether you're ready. And you've got enough of a sense in your stomach to have like some kind of mixture of, like, is it fear, is it dread, is it excitement, is it anticipation? And it's sort of like all of those things all kind of mixed together. And I want to tell you, you actually are ready. Yes, even you, Maddie, you're ready. But one of the things that has probably crossed your mind is sort of like, well, couldn't I just stay here another year, right? And I think that thought might cross your mind because that's comfortable, that's known, right? You know you can do high school. You think you know you can do the next step, but you're not exactly sure, right? So that's where you are, and that applies to you. And I want to say there that all those things that I just said, well, that applies to me, because a month from today, June 17th, I'm going to get on a plane and go to Ecuador, where this shirt is from. There we go, Dave. He was wondering where the shirt is from. And I'm going to spend about 3 weeks there. And my goal is to climb 3 different mountains that are there in the Andes. One of them is pictured here, Chimborazo. And I got to tell you, it sounds absolutely ridiculous to even say this out loud. And I am both excited and anticipatory when I look at this picture. There is some fear and some dread that's in there as well. So I want to let you know, like, I'm getting ready for a next big thing as well. So what I'd like to talk with you tonight about is that idea of getting ready for this thing. And so I want to share some reflections on some milestones that kind of answers the question of, like, wait a second, like, how do we get here? How do we get to this next step? So I'd like to lay some of that out and then explain some of what that means to me. Now that can sound very self-serving, and I suppose in some sense it is, but hopefully it will be also then a model for you to be kind of thinking about, well, what are the milestones that you've crossed? What sort of preparations have you done, and what might that mean for you on the verge of this next big step? So that's my thoughts for you. So for starters, I don't know if you saw the title, but I got this up here, right? 360,713 feet. So it would be reasonable to kind of ask, like, hey, what is with that title? 360,713 feet is the number of vertical feet that I've climbed on mountains over the last 20 years, on 3 different continents and on over 150 mountains. So this is something that I've spent a lot of time doing. If you're not too familiar with the idea of, like, vertical footage, just to put it in another frame of reference, this amount of vertical feet would be, say, like if we were just to stand here and then go about 60 miles straight up in the air. That's the total. So that would take us right about to the edge of space. So it is actually something, and even when I say this myself, I mean, it's a little surprising. It's like, wait, really? You've done that? And it's like, yeah, you do this a little bit by little bit, and then it kind of just adds up. And to that extent, over the last 20 years, this idea about mountain climbing has actually become part of my identity. That when I think of myself, if I'm just to describe myself, I'd say, like, well, I'm a teacher, and I'm a husband, and I'm a father, and I'm an amateur mountain climber. I'm not a professional. I don't want to mean to make that, but I am, and this has become actually, like, to myself, an important part of my own identity. And to that extent, then, there's been a series of milestones that I've crossed on that sort of helped me on this journey. And I think that it is a good analogy to say, like, for high school graduation. That high school graduation is coming soon, but you didn't get there in one step. There's things that you did along the way. Interestingly, there's things that you did along the way to get yourself ready for that step, even when you didn't know that was the path that you were on. And so, like, I didn't know 20 years ago, like, middle of 2016, I'm going to go up to, no, it's not like it's scheduled out like that. But I have been doing things that have been setting me on that path, which is explaining now, like, where I am and how I am getting ready for this next step. So what I'd like to do is share some information about 8 different milestones along the way. So I've gone back and I've kind of looked at some things and pulled some out. So I want to start with the first milestone is appropriately then the first mountains that I climbed. These are 2 mountains that are in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. So Carolyn is from New Hampshire. Her parents still live out there. So after we got married, we would go back there in the summers. And it was finally in 1996 that she took me to these mountains here. I think something that's worth noting is the year. It's 1996. So I was 28 years old. So I'm not going to tell you stories about, like, from my youth, I've been climbing in the mountains. It's like, I started at 28. I have no history back before that of backpacking or hiking. Oh, always going out camping with my parents. No, I'm just a suburban kid from outside Detroit, flatlander of Michigan. So this was a real revelation to me. And I think the big milestone there was inspiration. Because as soon as Carolyn took me to these mountains and I saw how awesome I thought they were, how they made me feel, how I reacted to the physical challenge of climbing them, then I knew that I wanted to be back. So that's a significant milestone right there, that idea of inspiration and really setting me out on a first step of a long journey. So we had some busy years after 1996. We got back to the White Mountains once in that time, but then life intervened. We bought a house for the first time. About 18 months later, we then sold that house because we didn't know that we were going to be coming down here. And so then we come down here and try to start a school and all that. It's great stuff, very busy. So we're not really going back to the mountains very much. So it wasn't until the middle of 2001 that we planned, Carolyn and I, to do a pretty significant backpacking trip in the White Mountains. So I put this picture up here. And I am not particularly proud of this picture because you're all very polite to have noted but not said. My, it seems like there's much more of you there than there is now. You are correct in that observation. This was a very demanding trip. I mean, in part because it's a backpacking trip in the mountains. So you got a backpack and you get to carry your food and stove and fuel and sleeping bag and all of that. And it was about a 55-pound backpack. I now know that is too much, so that's certainly one of the things that I've learned. But on top of that, there was probably about 50 to 70 pounds of me that didn't really need to be there either. So this trip was very challenging for me. And after I finished this trip, the milestone was honesty. I had to say to myself, I want to climb more mountains. And I am not in the physical condition that I need to be to climb those mountains. That is not an easy thing to do. Honesty with oneself, I think, is difficult. So that revelation was important. What was harder still was to say, okay, so then what is an actual plan to do something about this So the honesty of the revelation is hard. The honesty about making a plan was harder, and then the hardest thing was then actually following that plan. So I did enact that, and I did have some success. I must say, more than once in the intervening time, that plan has gotten a little hazy, and like some of that has come back. So this notion about like being honest with oneself is certainly a milestone, is a moment in time, but it was also a marker of saying I needed to circle back around to this honesty, and there were times when I needed to say once again to myself, like, I think I'm not on the path that I needed to be. So that was an important milestone for me. You would be correct if you noted that it's like, say, you know, a year actually did make a difference. So in the next summer, Carolyn and I went out to Colorado and climbed a couple of great mountains out there, Mount Harvard and Mount Columbia. And the milestone here was really that first experience of some higher altitude. So growing up in Michigan, you don't really get to this high. When we were out in the White Mountains, those mountains are 4,000 to 6,000 feet in elevation. So this is really the first time to get into those 5 digits and getting up to 14,000 feet. The thing that was awesome about this is both physically and metaphorically opening up a wider world. So the physical part was the idea that, well, hey, we're at 14,000 feet and not collapsing and gasping for breath. So it's like you can handle some of that physical change, but then also just that idea of being that high up and seeing that horizon with those mountains that are 100 or more miles away. It was really opening up kind of a new realm of possibilities, that it's like there really is a bigger world out there, and there are bigger mountains to look for. So that was a really kind of, what else might we be able to do in the future kind of moment. So that seemed like quite a milestone there. This is a picture of some mountains back in the White Mountains in the middle of New Hampshire. These are in a wilderness area called the Pemigewasset Wilderness, and it's Mount Bond Cliff here on the right, and in the distance is Mount Bond. There are 48 mountains in New Hampshire that are above 4,000 feet in elevation, so if you climb all of them, you get to say that you are a member of the 4,000 Footer Club of New Hampshire. So after I climbed a few of these, that seemed like an appropriate goal to go after. So I was slowly chipping away at that. It is kind of hard to do that when you live in Indiana and you're just going out at Christmas time and in summertime, so it's sort of chipping away. But in those early years, we were climbing those mountains as backpacking trips, and that's fine, but that's slow because you got those heavier packs, you do lower mileage days, and it just meant that the pace of this would be pretty slow. So in 2004, I decided to change some tactics and go just more for day hiking, for day climbs. So that's the idea, just like going up to the summit and down within one day, so you can carry less stuff. But it does mean for some of these, then doing more mileage days. And so this was a milestone because these mountains being in the middle of the Pemigewasset Wilderness, to climb up Bond Cliff and then over that ridge and then over to Bond and then back to the trailhead is a round trip of about 21 miles with about 4,000 vertical feet of elevation. So effectively, that meant doing a marathon to climb these mountains. And so this was intentionally a big test to set out for myself, and in completing that, it really did feel like there was a bit of a threshold being crossed in terms of some physical capabilities and what that might mean for some possible future elements. And so that was a significant milestone here. 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Nepal. And so this was a big trip to go all the way there, and it was about 3 weeks in total, and the highlight was trekking from a small mountain village for about a week up to Everest Base Camp, and then coming back. And so I was able to climb a smaller mountain called Kalapatar, 18,200 feet. So that is, to this day, my personal record in terms of the altitude that I've gotten to under my own power. Hopefully that record will be broken soon. And this was a very significant trip, both in terms of just like the figuring out how to get there and working with guides that were there. And again, this was really kind of cycling back around to this idea of inspiration, but now on a much greater magnitude. Because if you like the outdoors and you like hiking, then oh Nelly, you know, the Himalaya is really the jackpot moment. And this is when I think that notion about this being part of my identity was really starting to come into its own. You know, there's sort of this idea about like, you know, I'm doing this, but is this me? Am I doing this? Is this me? And like by the time I'm getting to this point, I think this is where it is actually starting to feel part of me. Wanted to see whether I had something else on that. No. We'll do this one here. 2009. I will say, Carolyn is a very patient and helpful person. July 10th is a significant day. It happens to be our anniversary. On this anniversary day here, well, I was on a mountain instead. She is a very patient woman in this regard. This is the 48th of those 48 mountains in New Hampshire that I climbed. So this was a big milestone day for me to get here. Awesome day, like just the way that you would really hope that it would be: blue sky, fluffy clouds, big mountain. And the milestone here was this real sense of completion, that it was putting a final bow on this project that had not taken just a day or a week or a month, but that had been spread over years to do this. And there was a sense of personal power that came out of that, like not like I'm going to take the world over kind of thing, but a sense of like, I actually can do this. That is something that I would well imagine at some point, maybe it's already passed, but at some point, that idea about high school graduation, you know, that idea like, you know, here's this big thing that is now finally coming to some fruition. And it ought to give you some sense of like validation and power to be able to finish something like that. There are some other mountains in New England that are at 4,000 feet or higher. So if you climb the other 5 that are in Vermont and the other 14 that are in Maine, then you get to become part of the New England 4,000 footer club. So you know, after 2009, it was like, well, why not? So summer of 2010, I climbed those 4,000 footers in Vermont, and then 2011 came to Maine to climb several of those. And so I picked this one here, Mount Reddington, as the 7th of 8 milestones that I want to pick out, not because this mountain is particularly big, the elevation is not terribly high, but it is a mountain in the middle of Maine that has no defined trails, no maintained trails to its summit. So it's in a wilderness area. And so I remember climbing to the top of a mountain called Crocker Mountain and looking over at Reddington and just trying to be sure that I was really going to do this. So I remember checking very carefully my map, looking at the terrain, checking it against the map. How much water did I have? What was my energy state like? What it was looking like in terms of the weather? And I checked it all again, and then I finally said, okay, you've checked it. And so then I went off into the woods. And so I took this picture as sort of just representative of some of the terrain that I was moving through. So I was trying to be very careful, very deliberate, trying to check for what little landmarks that I would be able to hear, you know, so like if there's some sense about like, whether I was getting lost, you know, like would I be able to backtrack back to the top of Crocker, which was a known spot. And of course, like once I started doing that, you know, then there's like those other little voices that come in, like, getting lost. Well, that would be interesting. Like, am I actually ready for a night out, or like maybe 2 nights out? And I actually am by myself, and you know, I guess like nobody actually knows where I am. They kind of know the area, and it's like, and so the milestone was having to deal with that, of having to take that and just say, you know, we are just going to put that aside. We're going to be very deliberate and move on, and we're not going to freak out. We're going to do the things that you know that you can do to actually get to the top of Reddington. And that was a really interesting experience about like kind of having that internal struggle to to just say, like, it makes sense to do this, and you don't have to give in to those thoughts. So I was able to make it to the top of Mount Reddington, went off the backside because then I was going to be able to hook up with some logging roads and loop back around to where the car was, and those logging roads actually turned out to be much more confusing than they were, so I had a second version of that. It's like, just how many hours of daylight is there? And it's like, boy, wasn't it a good idea to do this in July? So like nightfall is really late, and it's like, just like, focus. So that was an important piece. The last one I want to call out is from 2 Januaries ago, when Wes Priest and I taught a class in January term called the Lure of Everest, because it shouldn't come as a shock. I really like this stuff, and I've read a lot about this, and I'm going to share these stories. So doing that class is a great way of doing that. And then in the 3rd week of that class, then we took the students out to the White Mountains to do some ice climbing, and then to climb Mount Monroe out there in the Presidential Mountains. And the White Mountains in wintertime is serious stuff. I mean, like that's deep winter that they can get out there. The picture on the lower right is the picture from the summit of Mount Monroe, so it can kind of give you a little bit of a sense of what this is like. When we started this climb of Mount Monroe, it was -20 Fahrenheit at the trailhead, so 52 degrees below freezing. Like, that is really cold stuff that's there. But we learned a lot in this in terms of the gear and the layering and managing the body heat that you generate. And the guides that we worked with were very, very helpful in that regard. And then, like, learning to actually trust these inanimate things, this gear that would be there, that was really important. And being able to have some sense of handling this is really important in terms of climbing bigger mountains, because that idea about the cold and the harsh environment is really real there. So that was a big milestone. I think not just for me, but for some of those students as well. So those are some things that I picked out from the last 20 years there. And it's reasonable to ask, like, okay, so what does all this mean? Well, like, to me, it means a lot, because it's sort of a tip of an iceberg there of some of the things that I've done. It's representative of that. And that idea about getting inspiration, about finding a way to be honest with myself, about learning about my physical capabilities and trying to push those farther, learning in terms of how to handle the environment and how to handle myself in that environment, how to manage my gear with it. All of those are really important things for me, and they have led me to the precipice of this next big step. And again, it's that idea of, like, even when I didn't know that Ecuador was that next big step, these are the things that were getting put in place to make me ready for that. So it is then reasonable to say, like, okay, great, you understand that's meaningful for me. It's like, what does this have to do with you? Hopefully it can serve as some bit of a model that if you haven't spent some time thinking about some milestones from the last 12 to 18 years, you might want to think about it in this way, and maybe with some of these questions as prompts. This idea about what has inspired you. What is a time, when is a time when you've actually been honest with yourself about a shortcoming that you have, and then done something about it, like actually done something about that? When have you pushed yourself to learn more about your capabilities? When have you taken on some big task and really seen it through to the end? And when have you actually learned to trust yourself, so that you can kind of calm some of those internal doubts that are there? You all have milestones in your past. I'll say this, not to trivialize it, but sometimes I think we don't recognize the milestones because in retrospect it can seem really trivial. But they weren't trivial at the time, and it's important to give it its due. So, like, if you think about your education, like learning the alphabet, being at the bus stop on your own for the first time, getting yourself to school, writing a paper, and taking your first AP exam. And all of these are milestones. And they're all these things that have been these steps along your way. So what I'd like to do is now just summarize some thoughts and give you 5 takeaways that maybe might be helpful for you. So the first thing is, I do like what Chuck said, even if he was a bit more complimentary than he has to be. I love learning, so I'd just like to say, like, number one, like, learning things is just really good in and of itself. And I use this word scaffold intentionally, that idea about, like, building that structure around a structure so you can kind of maintain the existing structure or be able to build on top of it. And that's really how I see learning. Like, there's really no bad learning to do, because you're just building on things that you already know and building that tower of your knowledge higher. The thing that I think is really important here, and like the takeaway that I would like to have there is that idea about trusting that process. Because when your training and your preparation are in place, then you're ready for the next step. When your training and your preparation are in place, then you're ready for the next step. And it doesn't matter what the voices in your head say. Right? Because like, that's the thing, like when you got that kind of pit in the stomach and you're saying, like, should I actually be doing this? Because like that's kind of what I have some in terms of thinking about a month from now. Like then I have to go back and I say, well, like, what is the mileage that I've done? Like, what is the gear that I've collected? What is some of the experiences I've had? And then I've got to trust that it's like, okay, like the pieces actually are there. So I'm like, if you have some of that kind of thought about college too, like, will I actually be able to do this? I can tell you, like, you might not have done it yet, but I can tell you, Olivia, I'll tell this to you, the teachers here are really good. They really know their stuff. So the assignments they've been giving you are real assignments. And so like if you're ever wondering, like, am I gonna be able to handle college work? You are. Because you have been doing those things and you've been putting those pieces in place. So it's like that idea, I mean, if the training is there, the preparation is there, you're ready. Come back. Look at that. I didn't choke up. All right. This one. This sounds very trite. This is like a Tony Robbins kind of thing. I will say this. Some of you would know this. Carolyn will certainly attest to this. This is a really hard one for me because I'm a very independent person. I take great pride in being able to do things on my own, and it's sort of like I think my own internal marker of competency. Like, can I handle this myself? But again, to kind of circle back around to that idea of honesty, like if I'm actually honest, like almost all of those milestones that I just went through were there because of the help of other people. And it's like, it's been very critical in these steps along the way. So I'm going to call out some people here that have helped me to really kind of show this. Like I didn't do these things on my own. So the first person to note would be Carolyn Bradley, who was my first mountain guide, my first teacher of backpacking, my first teacher about hiking and gear and pacing. And I actually would not have done any of this stuff had it not been for her doing that initial leading of the way. Other people who have really helped me are people like John Krakauer, David Qualman, David Roberts. These are writers. And they are writers in magazines like National Geographic and National Geographic Adventure and Backpacker magazine. And these are people, they're not people that I know, but they're people that have inspired me. Because like I've read these magazines and it's made me want to do those things. And it's really been very cool over the years to like open up some of these magazines and realize like I actually have done some of these things now. National Geographic Adventure magazine is my favorite magazine ever. Sadly, it is not published anymore, but it had an awesome tagline. It was, "Dream it, plan it, do it." It's like that is awesome. And these people, through the skill of their writing, got me to do that dreaming. And then it was through this vehicle of being able to start to doing some of the planning and the doing with this. Chuck Webster has helped me a whole lot. It is, I mean, again, when you say like things that sound ridiculous to say out loud, we have known one another for 35 years. I met him in the fall of 1981. And really that long? Yes, it has been that long. And he's been my cheerleader, and he's supported me. He's helped me with time off. Yes, that is very nice. But even more than that, he has validated me in this. And I think what makes him special is that he has understood that this has been important to me, but he sees that in other people too. And so he validates those other things that are important because I think he understands very importantly this idea of multiple identities. Like, people are not just these unitary things, and like you see them at school, and that's an important piece, but he knows that people have these multiple aspects to their lives enough. Because like all those people that helped me had some people that helped them back then, and so that idea about keeping that chain going is really important. This third takeaway, this idea about setting goals, it's been a real powerful motivator for me. So shortly after my son was born in 2003, about 3 months after he was born, I set 5 10-year goals for myself. So things that I wanted to accomplish by 2013. A couple of them were really important goals to set. They were intangible. I wanted to be a better husband and father, and I wanted to make sure that I was finding a good work-life balance, a good work-home balance on that. I think goals like that are important. You never check those off the list and never say like, okay, right, done with that. They're important to have, I think, in terms of that idea of cycling back around. You can check in on those. The other 3 were more traditional and tangible goals. So the third goal was to get a master's degree. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then goals 4 and 5 were about mountains. So I wanted to climb, wanted to get to the 2/3 mark of the New Hampshire 48, and I wanted to climb a big mountain. By 2009, I had actually completed goals 4 and 5. I climbed all the 48, and I'd been to Nepal and climbed Kala Patar. And I think then this is the important piece that I learned about this, is to be like serious about the goals, but then let them breathe some and let them be flexible. So like when I completed because part of the problem with completable goals is like if you actually do complete them, it can kind of leave you with like okay, like what now, and like a little bit of aimlessness. So completing the 48 in New Hampshire, I was able to just like kind of like scooch that on over to those other 4,000 foot mountains. It's like, well, I can just like say like, this is what I actually should have said. Or that climbing the big mountain, well, that's defined by myself. What's a big mountain? Well, maybe it was Kala Patar, or maybe it's these mountains in Ecuador there. So that idea about having it as a driver, but having some flexibility to change it as well, I think is really important. So about that master's degree. So I said, I was going to do that by 2013. Well, I didn't do it. At least I didn't do it in the formal sense, right? So I don't have the degree that's in the frame and it's up on the wall, because I actually did get a master's degree that I defined. I got a master's degree in mountain climbing because I designed a course of study of reading and writing and thinking and reflecting and doing, and I did it in all the traditional time slots that you would actually do a master's degree, the weekends and the holiday breaks and during the summers. And like I wasn't doing the master's degree there because I was doing all the mountain climbing. And like someone could say like, oh, yes, well, that's not really a master's degree. Well, okay, fine, yes, I get that. But I think the important thing is that it is in my mind, and it has great value to me because it's something that I defined. Something that I want to say clearly, I want to make sure that I say this well so it doesn't sound dismissive. But in your earlier years, like up to about age 25, a lot of the things that you do are defined by other people for you. And that does not mean that they're simple. I mean, like high school can be hard, and college can be challenging. That is for sure. But it's largely been defined by other people for you. And that's good, and you should do it. What I really hope is that that isn't your end point, but that's more like the beginning point, that you can look at that and say, like, this is foundational, and you're learning things that are valuable skills for you, that then in that next phase, you are then going to use on a path that you begin to define for yourself. Because I feel like your life is not truly your own until you have some significant part that you've designed and executed through there. And that, I feel, has sort of been a very important piece of this mountain climbing for me. Maybe I could have done that I could have done that master's degree. I don't think I would have felt it as significant as this was for me. So being able to define your own objective. And then the last one that I want to leave you with is this notion here of be willing to be awed. It's like be willing to be made speechless. Individuals are important. I mean, probably like many of you, like I kind of go through my day and I'm like the lead actor of my day, and it kind of focuses on me. But finding some kind of balance where it can take that focus off the individual is really important. And I have found mountain climbing to be a spectacularly good way to have some different perspective on the importance of an individual being placed on this. Really creating a sense of smallness of one person. But what has been interesting to me is that that hasn't been a negative feeling. You know, this idea of the smallness of one person hasn't then been made into some feeling of insignificance. Instead, it's really been more about like a feeling of sublimity. The idea of being in the presence of such grandeur as to be awed. This is a picture that I took when I was hiking up towards Everest Base Camp. The big mountain in the middle is a mountain called Kumori. So if you head towards that, bear right, you'll be at Everest Base Camp. Bear right again, you'll get to the summit there. And there was a stillness and a beauty of this scene that really does, for me, capture that idea of the sublime. So for me, the physical challenge and the adventure of mountain climbing, they are definitely great things, but I feel like mostly because they are in service of taking me to places like this, where I can feel a part of a bigger whole, of really feeling that there is this greatness that is bigger than any one of us. And the most powerful feeling that I've had in the mountains was coming down off the slopes of Halapatar. So I've been at the summit with our group, and kind of congratulatory and taking pictures and slapping one another on the back, and that was great. But then after a while, felt like okay, it was time to move off the summit, and I started heading back down to our camp. And I was by myself as I was heading down, and a little ways off the summit, I stopped and I looked back at Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. 6 miles away from the summit is where I was, right? Direct line. And I looked at this, and I just started to weep. I mean, just like full-on breakdown. And so much that I had to sit down. And several minutes later, I had to ask her, what just happened here? And what had happened was there had just been so much feeling and so much experience that was there at this one moment in time that I could not contain it. I didn't have the words for it. So this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about in terms of being able to define your path. So something that I would really hope for all of you is that you're able to be in a place where you can define a path for yourself, and that path will take you to a place, to a space, to a time where you could have a moment or moments like that. Because a moment like that is powerful beyond description, because it just enlarges you and animates you and makes you aware of things that are possible that you did not know before. So the thing that I would hope for you is that you could take some time to reflect on some of the milestones that you have crossed to this point, and maybe starting to think about some of this larger meaning, who you might be able to get some help from, and how it can maybe lead you towards defining that path that will take you to that space, that place, that time. So, thank you very much.